Have you ever wanted to play XCOM 2 without any of the random RNG that was created by a short, old, vindictive human vegetable that wants you to feel a mere fraction of their suffering? Or what about experiencing the same repetitive gameplay loop like Darkest Dungeon but without any of the immense number of mods that provide a variety of fun, exciting, and morally dubious experiences that have yet to show any lasting effects on modern day gamers? Then do I have the game for you. Othercide is a roguelite, turn-based RPG that was developed by the French as their latest form of propaganda to steal our limited supply of goth GFs. Let's start things off with the story. Due to what I can only assume is a lack of a budget, the lore of Othercide is told through brief cutscenes and loading screens as well as randomly dropped in-game collectibles that I fell asleep reading one time and I couldn't bring myself to read them out of fear that my old age is starting to show, so forgive me if my retelling is not perfect. In the world of Othercide, there are two planes of existence. There's reality, where everything's the same as the world we know, and then there's unreality, where beings known as others exist. What are others exactly? Others are the personification of human concepts and any byproducts from them given form, such as sadness, memory, or one's attraction to anthropomorphic animals. For example, if there were a collective fear of androgynous men due to people realizing that their drinking water has been contaminated with Soylent in Detroit tap water, that fear would be personified and exist in unreality. And in between them lies a border wall that keeps those questionable thoughts away from us for 11 out of 12 months a year, known as the veil. Should a human allow themselves to be groomed by another into inhabiting their body, they can gain unimaginable powers like immortality, as well as Discord mod privileges, and become what is known as a chosen one. However, due to them being literal concepts given form, and just like your average politician and corporation through the supernatural forces known as lobbying and money, the laws of reality don't apply to them, and as such, often pose a risk towards destroying the veil due to the nightmarish personas and DeviantArt character OCs that can use them as mediums into reality, or a more worst case scenario, in other should its intentions be malicious. You play as the Mother, a chosen one that is bonded with the other known as Memory, and it's your job to stop the child, whose actual backstory is that he's a Skyrim child NPC who's managed to escape Todd Tower's dungeon and his other suffering from destroying the veil. However, the trauma of being stuck in Todd's dungeon for so many Skyrim re-releases has made the duo stronger than the Mother, resulting in her almost losing her life in their battle. It was only through permanently fusing with her other was she able to survive, creating a new entity known as the Red Mother, whose immodest body might give you the impression that you're playing a more cultured game. But due to your clash with the child, space and time have temporarily collapsed, forcing the both of you to be transported into a pocket dimension called the Dark Corner. The Dark Corner is what one can only assume is a post-COVID Australia, is a desolate wasteland full of inhabitants that are ready to shank, shoot, and rip you apart at a moment's notice. And to escape this nightmarish hellscape before being sent to the permanent afterlife by the police for breaking curfew, you're gonna need to stop the child in suffering from reaching their full potential. But this time, you're not alone. Using the last remains of her physical body and a combination of cosmic feminism and astrology, the Red Mother can spawn daughters via mitosis to take up the fight in her place. Gameplay. First things first, go into options and enable faster gameplay. Your still to be conceived grandkids will thank me. Combat takes a page out of Sun Tzu's The Art of War on chapter 4 paragraph 20, those who talk shit will get hit. Meaning if you go into battle without a plan, you will get your shit kicked in. Or you could go to the title screen right before your last unit dies. But if you find yourself relying on this strategy a lot more than you should, there is a difficulty made for people who badly review video games, and adult-sized infant, so if you can't handle nightmare difficulty, there's always Dream. Each battle follows a simple initiative-based timeline that determines the order in which your units and the opposing enemy units take their turns, but also when specific actions will happen. What makes this mechanic fun is that you can gaslight the timeline using power dynamics between your daughters by speeding them up or delaying the enemy units. However, the same can be done by them as well. Once it becomes a unit's turn, they're able to move or use up to 6 different skills that fall under 4 different types of action. The first is instant action, meaning the skill will happen immediately unless interrupted. Second is delayed action, meaning the skill will activate after a set amount of time. Third is interruption, which is the violent equivalence of an Uno reverse card. It can stop any incoming attacks directed at your units, in addition, deal damage towards the enemy unit committing the attack. Lastly is reaction. The skill's effect activates when a specific criteria is met. Each skill and movement requires a cost to be met in order for it to be conducted. Usually the cost is a unit's action points, or AP for short, except for interruption and reaction skills. They require something more valuable than AP, just a simple cost of your unit's health. You see, in the world of Othercide, all forms of healthcare have become privatized to the point that it's non-existent. Not even Jeff Bezos himself can afford a bottle of Flintstone vitamin gummies. So to combat this issue, you have to turn to alternative medicine to heal your daughters, which means blood ritual sacrifices are back on the menu. While we're on the topic of healing, as your daughters accumulate damage, you can actually see them get visibly more bloodied. Their clothes start to become tattered and covered with dust, and their bodies begin to have cuts and scars on them. It really does invoke a certain kind of feeling seeing your daughters toughen up into full-fledged battle-hardened veterans after each battle. So to restore your daughters to full health, you have to sacrifice a daughter of equal or greater level, and like real women, through the legal process known as divorce, gain a permanent stat bonus known as a trait. Hey, I don't make the rules here, only the strongest get to survive in my waifu army, so I recommend giving your daughters a simple name that can be applied to all of them, since you will be going through a lot of them. Traits are stat bonuses your daughters have the chance of getting after meeting specific criteria and completing a mission. Some are easy to get, while for others, your odds can be as low as 5%. Oh, and I forgot to mention, most traits can only be obtained within a specific level range. Have fun! Here's a simple piece of advice to achieve natty gains like these for your girls. Whenever you're starting a new run, always use your revive tokens to bring back units from the previous one with traits already on them. But traits aren't the only way to strengthen your daughters. Remembrances and Memories can give your girls the extra padding to keep up with their enemies. Remembrances are like traits but are applied to all your units instead of just the one, and like traits can be unlocked after meeting a certain threshold, like dealing damage against a specific enemy type, and is the only other way to obtain revive tokens besides completing a specific type of mission. However, remembrances need to be activated first by using shards, which just so happens to be a finite currency that can only be obtained at the end of your run, so use them wisely. Although, I do recommend not using any of the damage multipliers to get the full realistic female experience. While most memories are equippable effects that can be added to your skills like delaying the enemy or locking them in place. Small side note, most memories are useless due to them being only good for niche scenarios, if not, are flat out garbage. So I recommend only using memories that give damage multipliers, provide additional buffs, or delay the enemy. However, you can't just start equipping memories all willy-nilly, you have to first get them after being randomly dropped from enemies. And only then can they be equipped onto your daughter's skills if you have enough Vitae. Vitae, which will be henceforth referred to as vitamin water, is the lifeblood of your army. Not only can it be used to reliably strengthen your girls, but it just so happens to be the only way to create more daughters. And we're going to need some sacrifices for my Aztec ritual chopping block, because I'm not going to give up my good superior units for some affordable healthcare. If there's one thing this game has taught me, it is that we, as humans, have no inherent value. It is only through one's own hardships and the literal sacrifices of those more worthless than ourselves do we gain value. Each mission falls under one of 5 game modes known as synapses, and they need to be closed in order to progress. Why exactly do they need to be closed? Don't worry about that, it just sounds deeper and more nuanced on paper. The first and most common one is Hunt, although in my opinion should be renamed to Holy Crusade due to it being a just and righteous ethnic cleansing of those we deem impure until none are left on the map. Second is Rescue. Rescue is just a glorified escort mission without any of the fun of not doing it. You have to guide a lost soul from point A to unfun point B while dealing with multiple enemies to make sure she doesn't die. Honestly, it's very annoying and tedious, so I recommend doing them in the early stages for the least amount of resistance from the not so friendly local abominations. And once completed, you have the option to either save the lost soul that you just took a literal beating for extra vitamin water, or sacrifice her to get a revive token. Obviously, the more ethical solution would be to secure your natty gains, and vitamin water, contrary to popular belief, isn't meant for building up gains, so we're going to have to count this one as a unfortunate casualty for our just cause. Third is Ritual. Ritual is objectively the best mission to take due to them being the quickest one, since all you have to do is focus all your daughter's attention on assaulting a single enemy with a questionable skin tone who isn't going to fight back. Don't feel bad for them though, because after 5 turns have passed, it's going to be finished casting a ritual spell that will wipe out all your units. Fourth is Survival. Survival is pretty much self-explanatory. Your units are placed randomly on the map and must survive the endless wave of enemies that keep spawning until the exit appears. However, due to it being one of the longer running missions, it tends to overstate its welcome once you start to deal with the higher tier enemies that abuse gameplay mechanics more than you do. And lastly is Penance. Penance is the mission to take once you start to get cancelled for playing Ritual. It's very much like Hunt, but much quicker. Your daughters need to fill a bar with the souls of the enemies they've killed in order to lead the map. Now onto your units. Starting things off, you have the Shield Bearer. Using the power of female privilege, she acts as the tank for your units and will be the most fun to use in my opinion. Using her slam skill allows for her to hit her enemies with the literal force of the glass ceiling and pushes them back on the timeline and social hierarchy, allowing for her to both physically and mentally blue ball her enemies. Blacksmith Grace is a must-have skill to always run on your Shield Bearer due to it juicing her up with male testosterone and horse steroids. But it gets even better. Each hit she takes while she's in this state of roid rage moves her forward on the timeline, thus allowing her turns to come even faster. This especially comes in handy whenever she's about to be casting couched by a group of enemies, only to take little to no damage and get to have another turn to then kill them. It's like telling her to make you a sandwich, only to find out that you are the sandwich that's about to be made. For memories, I recommend equipping ones that give her increased armor for Blacksmith's Grace and additional turn delay on Slam. By doing so, you're giving her the home runs needed to fully transition into a literal brick wall so that she can effectively get her enemies ready for their nightly dick flattening. Next, you have the Soul Slinger. She specializes in ranged attacks and support, and she also happens to be the most efficient boss killing unit in the entire game. Always run Shadow Round. If you're not running it, uninstall the game because I think you need to see a doctor for any current mental handicaps. Shadow Rounds is what I would describe as a Texan's interpretation of having the last say, but instead of words, it's guns, and the final say is a bullet in the back of an enemy's head. Spirit Haste is mandatory to have as well. Using her ability of female empowerment and a simple medicinal cocktail of Adderall and Monster Energy, she's able to move her allies further up the timeline, allowing for exceptional team synergy. If you're not running both skills on your Soul Slinger, then I can only assume that you believe in fictional ideas like playing fair or gender equality. Forget about those thoughts and leave them on the curb like an unwanted mistake that you create after having too many drinks with a family member. Listen, when each battle is a matter of life and death, you gotta take whatever advantage you can get, because if I don't cheese the mechanics, the game would certainly do so against me. The Blade Master. Honestly, I can't say much about her. If you can easily get large amounts of dopamine from seeing big numbers, then she's perfect for you. She's what I imagine relationships between Discord e-girls results in.
No mercy.
Constant backstabs for one's benefit. She used to be the best unit in the game with her accepting stance skill due to it allowing her to attack enemies through space and time with slashes that have been imbued with quantum physics. Just look at her, a skill that turns a melee unit into a ranged one with the attack range in an entire map. However, that was too much fun for most players, so the devs thought it was a good idea to patch it out of the game under the guise of it being a unintentional bug. Now look at it, its range is pitiful, she has to be right next to the enemy to hit them. Overall, she's a solid unit until she misses, and then you think, what did they mean by this? And lastly, the Scythe Dancer. The Scythe Dancer is the incestuous love child between a human Beyblade and a chainsaw. She's like the Blade Master except for one minor detail. It's that she would be outlawed by the Geneva Convention if she left behind any survivors. She can hit with the same full unrestricted strength of the mentally disabled, steal armor from her enemies like a professional crackhead, and has an attack range of an atomic bomb. Honestly, she's quite broken. The only downside to her is that you're not able to use her at the start of your game, as well as the only balancing the devs gave her was that each use of her skills causes permanent damage to your retinas. But once you unlock her, you can use her at any point during your run, and she takes the same amount of vitamin water to create as your other daughters. She's a literal Grim Reaper that gets stronger the longer a battle takes as she steals the life force from her enemies. I now understand why my parents kept me away from the blender when I was younger. They feared the monster I could create from it. Or maybe they didn't want to take me to the hospital. Either way, she's fun to use for almost any situation. Now onto a few of the more memorable enemies. In no particular order, starting things off you have the Scavengers. Scavengers, like the homeless, are weak and insignificant by themselves, but in a group can become quite the problem for health and safety. Hunters are the nightmarish hybridization of a frog and a praying mantis, and embody a simple belief that walking is a fool's mindset, and dunking on your enemies is a far more efficient grind set. The larva only exists to suck your daughters off from across the map and to ruin any team formation you had in mind by keeping them rooted in place, but do be careful about attacking them from melee range or they will release their load prematurely and become both figuratively and literally hard. Worms only pose a real threat to those born without functioning legs and can be easily invalidated by taking 2 steps. The Guilt Bearer, Pain Slinger, Grief Master, and Hate Dancer are the edgy counterparts for your daughters and represent their pent-up mommy issues and function in the same way as your units do. And lastly, you have the Infected. The Infected can go fuck themselves. Why? Because they're bullshit. Unlike the rest of the enemies in the game, the Infected will actively try to run away from your daughters, making hunting them down a chore. They can both heal and buff enemy units free of charge, shoot come at you from ridiculous distances. By the way, said aforementioned money shots will shred your unit's armor, and armor doesn't regen. Oh, and when you finally manage to catch up to them, you better make sure to kill it or pray it doesn't walk up to one of your units, because once it becomes the infected's turn, it will hit the daughter that is next to it with the force of a brick thrown by a dog and do massive damage. If you want to stop this from happening, you can't, and that's because that action that it does just so happens to be one of the very few actions that are uninterruptible in the entire game, leaving you with only two options. A, you kill it or move your daughter out of its way, or B, watch as your daughter gets destroyed by a large pulsating piece of meat without giving her consent. And that's only just the first evolution of the infected. During the later parts of your run, you're going to be encountering the infested, which are the final evolution of the infected, and they're even worse. Their cum shots have an even farther range. Not only that, it's now laced with relaxers to make your units act later, and their healing and buffs now give initiative to enemy units. I would rather clean cum off of my floors than deal with them. I genuinely hate the infected more than any other unit in the entire game, including the bosses. Speaking of bosses, I'm not going to spoil any of them since most of the difficulty from fighting them comes from not knowing what they can do, except for the final boss, because he's garbage. The final boss, Suffering, can be split into two phases. The first is the punching bag phase. This phase is just a ritual mission disguised as a boss fight. Not really much of a big deal when you can burn through his 35,000 health bar in less than 5 minutes if you know how to turn your daughters into war goddesses. While the second phase is the Alt F4 phase, due to creating an immediate response in oneself to play a much better game. Through the countless deaths of your daughter, Suffering is able to create a body strong enough to break through the veil, and as such can use the same powers as them. This sounds like a cool concept for the final boss fight, except all he does is turn on dev mode to give himself an absurd amount of initiative so he can spam this one move that allows him to switch places with one of your daughters while dealing massive damage. And he'll keep doing that to the very same daughter till they die. Keep in mind, for the footage I'm currently showing, he's targeting my shield bearer, who currently has over 400 armor. For a shield bearer, this is easy to achieve, but for your non-tank DPS units who can't be legally identified as a brick wall, they're gonna get two-shot quite easily, leaving you with no means of getting through his 70,000 health bar. By the way, that move cannot be interrupted, so you better pray that he targets your shield bearer or get ready for your next run. Restarting the mission is perfectly understandable, if not optimal. I don't expect anyone to go through another 2 to 5 hour run just because some underpaid bonobo in the coding department thought it would be fun to have the final boss ignore the timeline entirely. Aside from that major issue, you can beat this phase in less than 3 minutes if you know what you're doing. I'll get through this quickly since this video is getting long. I like the gameplay a lot, even with all the previously mentioned headaches, but it has some issues. Sometimes the UI glitches out and you can't move or attack unless you reload the map entirely. The final boss has a chance to freeze during phase 1, at least for my copy. And having only 4 different types of units to use may not seem bad at first, but you're going to get bored fast and you're going to wish that the faster gameplay setting was even quicker. The music is fantastic. It's definitely something I would see the most socially inept outcast of children listening to at a hot topic, and it's the second reason why my playtime is so long. And lastly, I want more. The content in the game is quite bare bones, especially for the bosses. There's not enough of them, only 5 in total, and that's including the game-breaking nutsack. That's pretty short considering most of the game isn't scripted and is seed generated, and the most recent update should have been a feature in the game at launch, and the one before was a massive meme. Oh wow, I get to share my game seed with my friends to see who could beat it first. How exciting! But do you know what would be more exciting? Letting me edit enemy spawn rates so I can create an entire playthrough full of infected so that my friends can block me. Overall, I give Othercide a final object score of my full graveyard of human sacrifices out of 10. Should you play it? Yes, without a shadow of a doubt. But should you get it at full price? Oh, definitely not, especially when there are much better alternatives for much cheaper. But if you can't wait, I recommend you try the game first to see if it's worth your $30.